Chapter 24 of Heat, page 167. Michael didn't know what to do. He stood there, like frozen in place, like he was back at school and they were playing freeze in the yard at recess. He didn't know whether to just run the other way, or yell out to his brother, or just walk over there and explain to the policeman that there had to be some kind of mistake. Was Carlos being arrested? And if that was true, what had he done to get arrested? And what in the world was he doing with Ramon? Carlos had said he was going to work at Hector's, like he did 5 nights a week, and sometimes more, because he had told them to always call if one of the other boys didn't show up for work. Now the tall black policeman had his hand on Carlos' shoulder. He wasn't shoving him toward the van exactly. Marching him in the direction was more like it. A smaller policeman was doing the same with Ramon, the purse dealer. Michael could see Ramon talking away, the way he did talk and talk to Officer Crandell the day Michael's throw had taken him down in the outfield. Every few steps Michael saw, Ramon would stop and turn his head and say something, and the smaller cop would give him a push, and Ramon would keep going. Carlos didn't seem to be saying anything, just kept his head down, with what Michael knew was his Washington senator's cap on his head. Carlos, who had never done anything wrong in his life, who had never gotten a single detention in school, Carlos, who worked practically all the time so he and Michael could stay together. Now Michael stood there and wondered if these policemen were taking his brother away in some sort of portable jail. But why? The van, the size of a small bus, was closer to the subway station than it was to Macomb. Michael followed them toward it, keeping what he thought was a safe distance, afraid that at any moment Carlos might turn around and see him. And what do I do if Carlos does see me? Michael thought. He wanted to do something to help. It's what he thought a brother should do. He just didn't know what. Where was Manny when he really needed him? Michael had never paid much attention to White Van before, just knew it was always there for Yankee games, sitting there at the curb, part of the scenery on game nights, the way the outside vendors were. He had never seen it arrive, was never around late enough to see it when it left. He had no idea what was inside. He thought about going home as fast as he could, telling Mrs. C what had happened, seeing if she would know what to do, then coming right back. But then he wouldn't know if Carlos was still inside, or if they'd taken him someplace else. He had some change in his pocket and even thought about going to the payphone at the bottom of the subway steps and actually calling Manny, hoping that he would come up with some bright idea. After all, wasn't it Manny who had come up with the idea of a fake dad? Or maybe that's what I should do, Michael thought. Call my fake dad, Uncle Timo, the way kids called their real dad when they were in trouble. An hour ago it seemed like the worst thing that could possibly happen to him tonight was running Cal into that out at home plate against the Robins. The smaller policeman walked Ramon up some stairs into the van. Carlos and the tall policeman stayed outside. Carlos with his head down, still down, the policeman pointing a finger at him and doing all the talking. Carlos just nodding his head sometimes. Ever since Poppy died, Michael and Carlos had joked to each other that they had to stay one step ahead of the law. Not anymore. For the first time, Michael noticed what was written on the side of the white van in small blue letters underneath the huge picture of a badge, and the huge letters said NYPD. Prisoner Transport Trailer. Michael waited. He had decided that if Carlos didn't come out in the next few minutes, he was going to walk over to the van, knock on the door, and ask to see his brother. Just then, the door opened and Carlos came out, followed by the policeman. Carlos hesitated for a second, and in that moment looked straight at Michael as if he knew Michael had been there all along. Michael started to wave to his brother. Carlos shook his head. Michael pulled his arm down, stayed right where he was. Carlos came down the steps. The policeman followed him. Then the policeman was talking very hard to Carlos again, wagging his finger in front of his face like he was saying, "Don't ever let me catch you here again." Carlos just kept nodding right along with him. Then an amazing thing happened. Amazing to Michael, anyways. The policeman shook Carlos's hand, and pointed toward River Avenue like he was telling Carlos to go home, like he was letting him go. Still, Michael didn't move. Carlos waved back at the policeman and walked toward the subway station, crossed River without looking back at Michael, heard a huge cheer, what sounded like the Yankee home run cheer from inside the stadium. He didn't understand what he had just seen. He didn't know what happened to Ramon the perch stealer and didn't care. He didn't know what happened that he was supposed to do now, so he started walking home, hoping that was where Carlos was going. No jail, Michael thought. There was another cheer from inside, as big as before, back to back, home runs maybe. Michael wanted the cheer too. No jail. They were in Mrs. C's apartment. She had made them both fried egg sandwiches with crispy bacon and some kind of jalapeno cheese that was a little spicy for Michael. Not that he would ever admit that in front of Mrs. C or his brother. She was even letting them have soft drinks. Coke in those little bottles that Poppy always said made soda taste much better than plastic bottles or cans. Carlos had been doing all the talking. Mrs. C said she had told him when he called from what she thought was the real police station to come knock on her door whenever he got home, even if it was in the middle of the night. She was the one Carlos had called when the tall policeman, his name, according to Carlos, was Officer McRae, had told him he had to contact an adult or guardian. That was when Officer McRae was still playing the part of what Carlos called bad cop, acting for all the world as if Carlos was going to be arraigned as an adult in the night court at the Bronx County Courthouse that would be in session in a few hours, where Uncle Officer McRae told him he would be given a court date and released at his own reconnaissance. You know what that means, Miguel? Michael said he did, from all the times watching Law and Order with his brother. I know what you're thinking, Carlos said. I finally ended up in one of our favorite shows. It's not what I was thinking, Michael said. I was just thinking I'm glad we're here together. Carlos told them the whole story then. Meeting Ramon on the street after he got laid off from Hector's. Ramon telling him how much money a person could make scalping tickets if they knew how to do it right. Ramon finally talking him into it. Carlos telling himself he was only going to do it until he could find a better job. But why? Michael said. Because I couldn't pay the bills, Carlos said, his eyes getting all red again, the way they had when Michael had run into their own apartment when he got back to 825 Duran, run right across the room, and hugged Carlos the way he hardly ever did, because, Carlos said, if I paid electricity one month, then I had to wait until the next month to pay the phone, because I felt like one of those jugglers with the painted faces we used to see at El Guano Nacional, Miguel. I tried, hombre. I really tried. You should have told me, Michael said. Maybe I could have helped out. You never said anything, Mrs. C said. The man of the house isn't supposed to, Carlos said. Only when he's too proud, she said, wagging her finger at him the way Officer McRae had in front of the prisoner transport van. Poppy never asked anybody for help, Carlos said, and one day it helped kill him. Michael didn't even realize the words were inside his head until he heard himself saying them. Carlos whipped his head around, and Michael was afraid he was going to yell at for saying something like that, but his brother smiled instead. Sometimes I think you're the older brother, Carlos said. Maybe that's why they think I'm too old for Little League. No, Carlos said. It is because of the old soul Poppy always said you had. Michael had never understood what that meant, an old soul. Just knew Poppy used to say it all the time, before he would lean down and give Michael one of those kisses with his scratchy beard. Carlos pounded his fist on Mrs. C's kitchen table. I could have I could have ruined everything, he said, going for easy money. Ramon, he said, had showed him the moves, how to discreetly fold up two fingers as though making an old-fashioned peace symbol, looking for an eye contact that meant somebody was interested. Told him to always be suspicious of any fan walking into the stadium by himself and still seemed interested in buying two tickets, because sometimes that meant you had run into an undercover cop from the stadium detail. Ramon had told Carlos that if that happened, if he even thought he had been made to get ready to run, and to always have the escape route he wanted to use mapped out inside his head. Tonight it wasn't just one fan, as things turned out. It was a young couple, a man and a woman, both in Yankee home jerseys, saying they were in the upper deck and were hoping to move a little closer to the planet Earth, if that was at all possible. They were both from the Yankee Stadium detail, pulled out their badges before Carlos could run or do anything, showed their badges to him just as two other plainclothes cops were grabbing Ramon about 100 yards away. The man and the woman then handed him over to Officer McRae, who walked him to the van. "What happened to Ramon?" Michael said. "What Officer McRae said was going to happen to me. They took him to night court. Ramon must have forgotten to tell me he'd been caught once before and given a warning. Been told exactly what would happen if they ever caught him again. Fast runner, this Ramon," Mrs. C said. "Slow learner." "Two strikes and you're out," Michael said. Carlos said, something like that. Ramon had been taken to one part of the van, Carlos to another. Carlos told Officer McRae as much truth as he could, that his father was away and that he had been holding down two jobs and had lost one of them, then been dumb enough to listen to somebody like Ramon. Finally, Officer McRae felt he had scared him enough. He told Carlos he was releasing him because of what he called officer's discretion. "When he got me outside," Carlos said, "he told me that if he ever saw me at the Yankee Stadium again, I better be handing the ticket in my pocket over to somebody at one of the turnstiles." Carlos looked at Michael. "I'm so sorry, little brother." Michael had never seen his big brother cry, not even over Poppy, but he was afraid he might now. Mrs. C spoke before Michael could. "Sorry for what?" she said. "Scalping is against the law. Loving your brother is not." "Sorry for what?" she said. "Scalping is against the law. Loving your little brother is not."